notes if you'd like. So before I begin any book, talk about um, I usually talk about the author a little bit. So the author is Bell Hooks. Her birth name is Gloria Jane Watkins, but she's better known by her pen name Bell Hooks. She took the name from her grandma, Belle Blair Hooks, and this is something that a lot of feminists were doing at the time, and they would take names from female ancestors, and Bell Hooks decided to do this. And she decided to not capitalize the name to symbolize putting focus on the books, not the person. And then, funny enough, people are like, "Well, why doesn't she capitalize Bell Hooks?" And then so like the focus kind of did become on that. But I just always think that's interesting and worth mentioning when talking about her, because all times people be like, "You didn't capitalize a name," and that's intentional. Um, she taught at institutions including Stanford University, Yale, and the City College of New York before joining Barry College, where a decade later she founded the Bell Hooks Institute. She taught at several. Oh, sorry. I think she studied. That's actually a typo. So she studied at Stanford, Yale, and City College, New York, and she taught at several post-secondary institutions, including University of California, Santa Cruz, San Francisco State University, and Yale. She describes herself as a queer pas gay, which translates to queer not gay. I kind of found this. Well, basically, what this means is she explained that to her, being queer wasn't about sexual partners, but a reflection of finding a community you fit with. And like personally, I kind of found this to be kind of strange. Oh, my camera's on. There you go. I kind of found this to
Oh,
be
hello.
strange. Hello. Because I don't know. It's just like when people talk about being queer, it like not that it has to be around gender or sexual identity. It's just kind of like it just like seems like a way where like maybe like people are like maybe inserting themselves into a space where I'm kind of just like I don't know if that's like for you to be inserting yourselves there, but I'm sure some people also find it nice, or like I don't know. There is just like a case to be made for like everyone is queer in some type of way. That's a cool thing about queerness is like people just don't really fit a mold. Um, but yeah, that's how she identifies herself. And this is a quote from her. She says, "As the essence of queer, I think Tim Dean's work on being queer and queer not as being who you're having sex with, that can be a dimension of it, but queer is being about the self that is at odds with everything around it, and it has to invent and create and find a place to speak and thrive and to live." So that's a bit about Bell Hooks. She's obviously like, oh, she's been a prolific writer as well. She's written a lot of books. And yeah, I've actually never read a Bell Hooks book. I've read excerpts from her in classes that I had on, racism and feminism. And I've really liked what I've read. Like I kind of like put her up there with Audre Lorde. Like she talks about like, she seems like have this presence about like talking about your feelings and your humanity in a way where like for me like my favorite thing about a lot of feminist works is often talking about this, because I think there's a way where people are, like, in this book all about love, she's like, yeah, when people talk about love, people think that you're just like being silly. People think that you're just like you're just like being like a silly woman, like why are you talking about love and your feelings. And she's like, well, this is really important. It's the reason why I want to be alive, so we should talk about this and try to understand it. And so I think a lot of feminist work does that, where it's like there's like a lot of feelings where people are like, that's weak, and it's like actually this is like a really important part of our experience as living beings. Let's talk about it. um yes, let's dive in. um let's just talk about the preface. I just have a couple notes. I guess it's the thing that I already talked about. Even when she was a kid, she said that it's clear that life wasn't worth living without love. And I do want to note that she noticed this because she had an absence of love. Um, and this is another thing is really important. Like she talks about like grief and loss, because she talks about how so many of us grew up in dysfunctional families. We kind of grew up in places that weren't loving. And she talks about how to make space for love, we must first grieve its loss. Um, yeah, does anyone have any thoughts on the preface before we move on to the introduction?
Uh, Kind of a thought, like, with queerness without necessarily needing to be gay, like, I can see how that could work because, an example would be queer platonic partnerships. Like, you could have two straight people, but if they're in a queer platonic partnership and using that format of relationship, that's still out of the norm. It would still be queer, even if they aren't necessarily gay. That's my only thought.
Like having like two queer people who are queer but they're friends and it's just platonic.
Queer platonic partnership is something that you hear a lot about in asexual and romantic spaces, which is it's not exactly a friendship, but it's not a romantic relationship either. Um, it's platonic, but it's a
Cohabitation.
very dedicated partnership where they still do things together. They might even raise kids together in some instances,
Mm-hmm.
but it isn't done romantically, and the specifics of it vary by who's doing it. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah. Anything else on what we just said before we're moving on?
I really like the preface because it's a nice, like, it's extremely concise, but it covers a lot of ground, and it talks about like kind of the heart of the book, or like what Bell Hooks is trying to do in the book. I think is like talk about not only the state of love, but like how disoriented we are generally in terms of trying to talk about it, and kind of names the source of that disorientation, and then the further confusion of like suddenly being an adult in a world where, well, what the heck is love anyway? Maybe it's not that important, or maybe it's just really abstract. So yeah, I don't know. I thought it was really effective, and and it made me want to read the whole book really fast, which I did
Oh, you read the whole thing already?
a long time ago.
Okay, cool.
I mean, a long time, like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
What? That's not a long time ago at all.
I mean, a long time ago with respect to us. So, anyways, I'm excited about the book. I like the book.
I was like thinking a few years ago. I was like, oh, okay.
No, I listened to the whole audiobook really on a couple of walks to and from work.
Nice.
Okay, that's all I have to say for now.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, this is like, I don't know. This is kind of like a good segue into the rest of her writings, where like she establishes like, she does a great job at like defining terms. So she defines like, love. Like this is what love is to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's oh, own or another spiritual growth. And love is like care, affection, recognition, respect, and commitment. It's all these things. um you know there's like choice. There's a choice in love. Like she makes this distinguishment of like, people think that you can't control what, I think to an extent, like the feelings, your immediate feelings that you have, you're gonna have those feelings, but also like there's a choice in who you love. It's not just kind of like, oh, there's nothing to be done. There's a choice in there. And she makes these really important distinguishments between like, she talks about cathexis. I'm probably saying that wrong. Cathexis. Oh, I should look that up. But she talks about that, and it's like, the process of like when someone starts becoming important in your life, and how that's not necessarily love. Like someone can be important in your life, but it's not love. And I think these are all really good distinguishments to make, because getting down to this term dysfunctional, it's like you can live in a family that has cared for you, but they might have not necessarily given you love. And at the same time, you can still appreciate the care that they did give. It's not like a black or white scenario. But yeah, I think she does a great job out talking about the confusion that we have around love. Like, this is what love is. This is what, cathexis is. This is what care is, which, love entails care, but care doesn't necessarily mean that it's love. And so she does a good job at like giving these definitions, so that way we can identify what love is and what love isn't, because like most of us can't even do that. Like, she says our confusion about what we mean when we use the word love is a source of our difficulty in loving. Um, and yeah, I think she's right. Like, just going on like on a personal tangent, like I feel like I grew up being like, yeah, like these people love me, and like looking back, I'm like, they really didn't. Like, a lot of people that I thought were my friends were just uh didn't really care about me. Like I have like memories of people kind of just like feeling embarrassed on my behalf, or I have like memories of like family members um not being able to be there emotionally, or people not being able to be emotionally. And it's like, and then bell hooks is right, like you try to rationalize that and you're like, oh well, deep down they still love you. And that doesn't mean they don't have some sort of care for you, but I'm like, that's not at least what I would call love. And I want to be around people who love me and who I love them. And intentionally carving that, I can at least try to intentionally carve that out because I know what love is. So it's like I feel like I've just had these realizations. So it's like actually kind of perfect timing that we're reading this book. But yeah, does anyone have any thoughts on that? Even if it's like talking about like your own like life story or something like that. But any thoughts on bell hooks and love?
I have so many thoughts. This book, I couldn't do it like Ben. I couldn't just like take the whole thing in one. So I really had to sit with this because it brought up some stuff. And what I really took away from it is that I'm not. I wasn't like bell hooks in the sense that I reflected on family or friends or what have you, and thought of how they didn't love me. I thought a lot of how they did love me, and it was obvious, and it was also obvious that they loved a lot of people around me a lot less, to the point where you could say that they didn't love some of the other people who maybe they should have, um, and maybe this will be covered later in other chapters, but it was a lot of not knowing what to do with that.
Mm.
um,
Like not
so
knowing
that's
what to
where
do
I'm
with
at
it,
right
that
now.
people loved you a lot, but then you saw they didn't really have love for other people.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know if this is like the same incident, but like whenever I watch Lord of the Rings and then I see like okay, like Sam was a great friend to Frodo, and then he was a dick to Gollum. And I'm just like, yo, like literally, like Gollum was like, oh, maybe I don't need the ring, and then Sam's like, fuck you, and then Gollum like just relapses into being, well, Smeagol like relapses into being Gollum because of Sam. So like literally, like Sam's like the best friend in the world to Frodo. Like when they're talking about the Shire and strawberries, I'm like crying. And then also I'm like, this person like kind of ruined Gollum's life. And yeah, but I think it's interesting that like some people can be really great and loving towards others, and then other people, that same person can be like really bad for other people. And that's always like really confusing to see because it feels so inconsistent. You're like, but I don't know if that's at all what you're talking about, but it's something that I think about a lot where it just, yeah, I think about stuff like that a lot.
Yeah, it's like that exactly. Well, not exactly in the sense that it wasn't the level of dickishness that Sam was to Gollum or anything, but
Mm.
in the sense of you can really feel and tell, and I shouldn't use feel there because I mean she makes a point to say that love isn't really a feeling, but it's like there's the action verb of loving that was and done to me a lot, and I can think of a lot of other instances where people would bring it to my attention, like you know they're showing that they love you and they're showing that they don't love me, and
Right.
I really had a habit of brushing that aside or making excuses for it, and yeah, I've had to confront that here.
Yeah, I think it's really, it's like when you're the person who's like, where the person's being nice to, it's really easy to be like, oh, they're not like that. But I think people do have different experiences of people, and it's something that like, I think for me, like, yeah, I think I've had a hard time with that, where like I've been in friend groups where like something really fucked up will happen. I'll be like, this was fucked up and this hurt me. And this thing happens where like people like just kind of like take sides, unfortunately. Like even if you don't want that, that just like kind of starts to organically happen around conflict. And so like it's been a breath of fresh air to be around people where like that's literally like it's just not going to happen. Like where something bad happens and I'm like, I feel hurt by this, I feel hurt by this person's actions. And even if people like that person and they're like, they haven't done that to me, they can still believe me when I say that they've done that or to me. Like, even if they haven't done that to them, they're like, that's not proof that they didn't do that to you. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that their friendship with them ends either. That just like is so rare though. I feel like usually like there's like kind of like someone's not believed. That's extremely painful for that person. And yeah, so I don't know if that has anything to do with bell hooks, but that just made me think about all of that.
There was a thing that Jeremy just brought up, which I think comes up on like page 4. I think that's what I wrote. Yeah, where it's talking about love as action, like it's something that be like active, and it just reminded me of the unfortunately often discussion about ally and how it's like it is a noun but it's also a verb, and this this thing, it was actually a tweet that a friend of mine shared. I'm gonna try. They were saying, I'm sorry, I'm just reading out a tweet, but I saw this and I wanted to say, I think this is Aaron Radney, who's on Twitter, and they're an illustrator, but they said, a thing I have noticed consistently is that one of the major tools of white supremacy likes to take things that are verbs and make them into nouns. So you have things like ally being turned into where, rather than...
Oh, you broke up a little bit, or at least for me. Can you just take the last couple sentences?
So in this tweet, it's mentioning how very often things that are verbs are stripped of the sort of action content and are turned into just nouns. Mm-hmm. So things like ally, and things also in this case like love, where it's like you have the noun, you have the kind of the title, the badge of being loved, or the concept of love, but it's been stripped of all the things that you need to do for it to qualify for being love, just like with the whole concept of allies, where and this is it's a thing that I get a bit about, like, and it's no offense meant to people who do so innocently and maybe don't think about it. They just want to let people know when there is just the word, like there is an ally in the profile or an ally like just written there. I always think, did the community who you are allying with before you put that? Like I feel like it's something I could never call myself that.
Wait, did the community
without having been told by...
Sorry, like it cut out just like at that word. Like, did the community you were blank with?
Connection is also pretty...
Community that you're claiming to be an ally for give you this permanent ally status, I think is what Tom was saying.
Yeah, it's like I wouldn't be comfortable and I wouldn't be okay with calling myself that unless somebody in that community said, and even then I would still be like hesitant, because it's like, well, it's not like, oh, I've reached level 5 allyship or whatever, now I level up. You kind of and I just did me of that when she's talking about love being an action, or also like a process where it's not something that necessarily ends at any point. It's something that you're figuring out. I mean, I've only known one love in my life. Most of it before this relationship was unrequited, and it is weird because she mentions a lot of stuff as well, where it's like I recognized the thoughts I had about what love was supposed to be for a long time. And then you're actually in a relationship where there are all the things that she listed. There's the respect, there's the cherishing, there's the trust, and then you just realize, yeah, romance films are bullshit.
Yeah, they're a problem.
It's all.
Yeah, it's like
Oh,
literally.
sorry, Lou,
like,
I didn't hear what you just said.
Oh, just like they're just such a problem. Like I used to like just eat up romance. When I was younger, I would like read all this manga, shoujo manga, and at some point, I realized like this is like literally like an abusive relationship, but it's like a romance where it's like he'll be like like the guy will be like stalking her, but it's like because he wants her to be safe. But like in real life, you're like, wait a minute, why is he stalking her? Like there's like things like that where it's like
Don't do that.
you like look back and you're like, what did I just like read? And yeah, there's like there's like always like weird stuff where it's like in the context of romance, you're like, oh, it's sweet, but then actually like you're like, actually this is like really unhealthy. And it's so weird that those really unhealthy ideas of love are like that's what our culture's like, this is what love is, and like celebrates it. And I'm not trying to make people feel bad for just like wanting to watch a rom-com. It's I'm just thinking about like our culture's like ideas of what love is. But yeah, I think also maybe this is another like timely thing to talk about is like how Bell Hooks talks about like how men typically talk about love versus how women typically talk about love. Yeah, I think it's interesting because like I feel like when I watch like movies for guys, when they talk about love, like it's like in the form of like receiving. Like there'll often be like a woman and child, like a wife and child character that like dies, and then that like puts some sort of guy on their quest of revenge or something like that. It's like completely a plot device. But then when there's like flashbacks of like this loving relationship, it's like him just taking and taking, and it's like I hate that stuff so much because I'm just like, yeah, you weren't equipped. You just, I don't know. It's like I've just like been in so many relationships with guys where like they just kind of take and take. But then also like with women, it's like longing, which is like the whole notice me senpai thing. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that, but there's like this like joke where like in shoujo animes like girls would be like, wow, senpai. So senpai is like an older upperclassman. Sorry, it's like, does everyone here watch anime? Okay.
Enough.
Okay,
Enough
okay.
anime, yeah.
I'm just like, wait, but like it's like literally like the
No,
whole
I know
thing.
from osmosis.
Oh wait, Tom, you don't. Basically, there's just like this thing where it's like, oh, this upperclassman noticed me, and it's like a running joke because it's like notice me senpai, which just means an upperclassman, and it's like this whole thing, like this whole genre of like shoujo, and not just shoujo, but like even in like American romance for women, it's like this person noticed me, and it's just like because that's like how insecure like we're kind of like raised to be, where it's like even just the person that you're attracted to just noticing you is like a huge deal because that's how invisible you feel. And so it's just like this feeling of emptiness and just like hoping that one day your existence will be validated. I'm just like, it's like those are kind of tend to be like our two ideas of romance, that are like heavily gendered. Like you've got like men being able to give nothing back and then having like these flashbacks of like just like taking and receiving, and like women are just a plot device, something to be protected, so that way you have like some sort of egoistic story about how cool you are. Or you have like women being like so insecure that they're just like longing for some sort of validation for their existence, and it's like that's so sad to me. It's like, yeah, that's just like so sad to me. It's like I want to like see like people like develop like a friendship and care for each other, not just like this like sad empty void. And yeah, I don't know if that was kind of ranty, but I don't know if people have thoughts on that.
Not ranty. Like the first line in the book basically is, I don't know, it's something that kind of shook me as someone who's been socialized as a man, about like men not wanting to use the word love lightly, and thinking about like the weird patterns of like being withholding, or being hesitant, or being like, well, I have feelings for this person and I want good things for them, but if I say I love them, that's a big risk because it opens me up in some way, and I don't know if I'll be able to really live up to that. And I think it's connected to another point that she makes generally in the book, which is that like people are pretty content to stick with love as a very mystical, abstract, spiritual, like not something that actually has many moorings in real life, but like a really strong feeling, and you'll know when you get it, and don't try to define it. She does a lot of
You're like,
like,
why not?
right, exactly. And I think, and when you ask that question, which is what she's doing in the book, and I think she is encountering a lot of resistance because it's so deeply ingrained to be like, whoa, don't try to understand love, like leave that in the weird mystical corner of
Cosmic.
things you can never understand. And don't think about how you're a man and you're withholding with the idea of love, because that's just how men are, and don't worry about it and just leave it all in the kind of abstract corner. Things will probably sort themselves out. And then a little bit like Tom's describing, you're in a relationship and you're like, oh wait, like what does it mean to love someone? How do I turn this into a verb? I'm totally adrift with my vague ideas of what love might be. I think I'm gonna do my best, but so here's Bell Hooks being like, no, let's fucking do the work. And of course, I like how she talks also about how pissed off she is that people are like, this is a silly question. She's like, no, it's not silly. People really need this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really do like it. It brought a lot together for me when she was kind of doing, like she does a lot of media analysis in the book generally, but she kind of starts with self-help books and a lot of relationship books that are, a lot of them just saying like, yeah, love, don't try to define it. Don't try to define love. It's a big mystery, and don't even try, because that's bad. And I like that she opposes that.
Yeah, I think it's something that like I mean, she says this in the book, like we have classes on sex, but we don't have classes on love. And I do think it's also like this poverty of just, colonialism, like, and like just the kind of society we're in. Like when I think about like when people talk about like land back, they're talking about it's also like a spiritual movement as well. And I just want to read how Bell Hooks defines spirituality, because I think it's a really, really great definition. So she said, that dimension of our core reality where mind, body, and spirit are one. An individual does not need to be a believer in a relation to embrace the idea that there is an animating principle in the self, a life force. Some of us call it a soul, that when nurtured enhances our capacity to be more fully self-actualized and be able to engage in communion with the world around us. And it's like, that to me is so important. And like when I think about like indigenous, so like when I used to be religious. One thing that like shook my faith was just like, like when you're religious, or like when I was Christian, like you learned about like, and especially evangelical Christianity, like we learned about like, oh, all these like brown people, like they just don't, like they're so sad, they need Christianity, they don't know how to live. And one thing that really struck me was when I learned about other people's religions and learned about how other people practice that, like the way that it was like holistic. For some of these religions, it was just kind of blew my mind away. I was like, wow. And then when I looked into indigenous, like the way that indigenous people like practice religions, kind of across the board, even though there's all these different practices, different cultures, like there's a common thread is like kind of this like self-action ties into like how they understand the environment around them, the rest of the biotic community, how they gather food, how they have relationships with each other. And so there's like this holistic understanding that's like developed over thousands of years, and it allows people to have like better relationships with each other, and again the self-actualization and all of that. And so to me, like that's what spirituality is. And then when we talk about Audre Lorde, like I think Audre Lorde calls actually this the erotic, when she's like, people think of like eroticism as in sex, and that's like not necessarily untrue, but like eroticism is like how present can I be with the world around me, and in what I'm doing, and all these things. It's like I don't want to tell everyone how to live, but it seems like these things are generally necessary to like live a fulfilling life, for a lot of people. Like obviously there's going to be exceptions, but I forgot why I'm saying all this, but I just think spirituality is important, and like I like that she defined it in those terms. Um, yeah, any thoughts on that? Jeremy, I see you smiling. I feel like maybe you want to say something.
Yeah, yeah, you were speaking my mind, man. The the big thing that came out of that for me was my family is Christian, and like like I want to say 10 years ago now, I was like, this feels off, and I'm not Christian anymore, right? But like a big part of that for me was like the way that you were talking about how they Christians will like be looking at all the brown people and being like, oh, we got to teach them the right way to do things, and it's like what you were describing with their sense of spirituality. It's like a symbiotic relationship where it's not just about like how you decide to express your love, but how other people express it back to you, and it's like that is like super missing from like every version of Christianity and the Bible that I know of. It's very very self-centered, and like I'll think about like my some of my family members, it's like their favorite verse is like for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, and it's like so much about what you're surrendering and what you're giving, and it's just like encouraging you to focus on yourself way too much, in such a sense that it's like this version of love is like really obviously unhealthy, and uh, like if this is what spirituality is supposed to be, if this is what love is supposed to be, then we should find something else to do. But it's like, um, you know, I feel like my parents' generation, they don't want to think of it like that, and it'll just be like talks with my friends, my church friends, and then even after I was like done with church, outside of that, it would be like all of us feel like this is wrong, but we don't know exactly what to do with it. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's what was running through my mind.
Yeah. No, I think yeah, like I like took issues with a lot of those things too. Um, yeah, I forgot what I was gonna say. There was like something I was gonna add on there, but uh, yeah, anything.
For me,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go
I,
ahead.
for me, because I still am a Christian, like the way I try to process it through is the way Christianity is practiced. Doesn't reflect any of the actual values put in it, which does make a huge sense of it being off to me too. But like I think a lot of it comes just how it's been used as a political tool and a tool for colonialism for hundreds of years now. So while there's nothing inherently wrong with the faith, the way that it's practiced and the way that it is taught has become very and have been for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, after I left Christianity, I like went through a militant atheist phase, which I think is hard not to do when you're like. I feel like the more Christian you are, the more likely like that phase will happen. But I don't feel that way anymore. Now I feel like if people can practice Christianity in a way that's like enriching their lives and the lives of other people, then I think that's really good. And I kind of think that's like, I'm this is like not like a scientific understanding, but I kind of think that's what religion is. Like when I like look at all these like different religions of people, especially like indigenous people, like it really did just that. And like the way that they have like everything was so intertwined. Like you hear indigenous people talking about the land, how that's intertwined with their religion, how it's intertwined with their culture. It's like you can't really like remove any one of these things, and it's like really delicate. But I think it's really beautiful how much like like love and dedication that you have to like the life around you in a way that's like actually really hard to do in this kind of culture that we have. You know, which is kind of going back to all about love. It's like I think that's why talking about love is just like so like whoa, like this like kind of like heaviness, this like love and dedication and like understanding and care. um I think it's hard for a reason because I think it's easier to control people. um yeah. um let's see, I wonder, so we kind of went through these definitions that she gave of what love is. I really like, we touched on this, but maybe it's important to say this. I really like how she says the will to extend one's self for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and action. I think that's a really powerful definition, like the will to nurture one's own or another spiritual growth. Um, and yeah, love is as love does. Um, Again, she like just gives this really good definition of like dysfunction. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think that's like a really these kind of like distinguishments that she's trying to make is really helpful. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I like where she talks about dysfunctional is not an absolute judgment, because that is something that at least I tend to struggle with a lot. Like, family might think that they care about you, but like not care about your emotional needs, or not want to actually adjust to your existence, but they still provide what you need to survive, and they're still uh, doing that side of things without question. And so dysfunctional is not an absolute judgment. A useful concept of.
Yeah, because I think families can often get hurt when it's like you don't, when you say like, you don't really love me. I think maybe saying dysfunctional can like just help have these conversations with families where it's like this is dysfunctional. Because yeah, I mean she was saying like if her parents had been raised by parents who were loving, they would have done the same. She knows that they would have done the same for her, but that's not what happened. And so it's like I like that it's kind of like, well, things are more complicated than just like, or often more complicated than like, this is like good or bad. It's like I like that she talks about the dysfunctional. Um, yeah, one other thing that I wanted to talk about was she mentions that I do like that because she talks about this book like Men Are from Mars, or I forgot what it's called. It's like Men Are from Mars, Men Are from Jupiter, or vice versa, something like that. And I remember like I found that book multiple times. Like it's really funny. Like I've seen that book. I like because I used to do like volunteer work and stuff, and I've like cleaned churches and stuff and like found that book, and I'm like, I don't know. She says that she likes it. I like saw that and I was like, I don't think anyone should ever read this because it's like so like this is just how men are and this is just how women are, and it's like
I
I
think
really
pretty reservations. I don't think she says she likes it uncritically. I think she
She
says
likes
she's
it
like.
ironically, I think.
oh really
I think no. I think
ironically.
she's like it's. She was like annoyed that she found things in there that were useful, but the general thesis really bothers her
Yeah.
of that kind of thing. So yeah, just wanted to
Yeah,
jump in there.
I think she said that because I think she like described it as something about it like being like maybe I misunderstood it. I think she just yeah, but she does describe parts of being helpful, but she later on like talks about um how like we're not really like these things that we like think are inherent about men or women, men and women are like something that we like learn as opposed to just like being an inherent thing. So I'm really glad that she says that. I don't think I wrote down where she says that, but I I just appreciated her like making that distinction because it's like something that just like exhausts me is just this idea of like, well, that's just how men are. and we actually did talk about this earlier, but like that's how, like, when people are like, well, that's just how men are, so we have to learn how to, like, like just live with this like discommunication, or this like lack of communication that we have, and that's just that. And I'm just like, gosh, that's such a bleak view of humanity, and I'm really glad
Yes.
that she brings that up, because yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Uh, Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I like the overall approach she has to the topic, because also focusing on a book like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus is like, it feels very much like a philosopher is like, well, I know this point of view is crap, but I have to study it. I have to analyze it. I have to understand what is being proposed so that I can not necessarily combat it, but like deconstruct it. And like, I got the impression from when she's talking about that book, like, that she's kind of morbidly fascinated by it. It's like, wow, this is this is really interesting. But I like that it's a kind of practical philosophy, because in defining something that is culturally always presented as this kind of non-definable thing, this nebulous concept, not only she's saying we need to put in the work so that we can have a healthier like understanding of it in our society, but it's also just making philosophy practical, which is something that I've always been annoyed at, how much of philosophy always felt very abstract to me personally. But like, when you're studying philosophy and it's like, here's what this concept means, here's what this concept means, and my thoughts were always like, well, how do I apply this? And very often it's not really easy to apply. And I think doing that with something like love is crucial and very important, because so many other things have had that approach applied to them, but for some reason not love. And I like that she's very clear and upfront about that intention. It's like, yeah, why aren't we trying to define it? It doesn't limit it. Like, that's like this misconception that if you define something, I think it's oh, you're inherently limiting it. But our brains kind of need to work in that sort of ways. Like, we need to have a definition to kind of guide us. And it's like, okay, well, now I have a vague, like a less vague idea of what I'm talking about and what I'm seeing, what I'm perceiving. And it can get weaponized in a way, because then that definition can be made more rigid. It can be made extreme or whatever, and then you get into trouble.
But the nebulousness can also be weaponized. Just
oh yeah, no, exactly. Like, yeah, it's I didn't express. I
was trying to support your point. Sorry, I was trying to support your point.
No, it's like, because it's like there's a sweet spot in between. It's like, when things are left nebulous, it invites so much misinterpretation or weaponized interpretation. And at the same, if you go to the other end of the extreme and things are made very rigid and very dogmatic, then you also get that problem. And there's a point in between where it's just like, I'm just trying to understand shit. I'm just trying to.
Where effective communication happens.
Yeah. And yeah, I like that is the approach being applied to love, because I've never seen that before, and it was nice. That's my contribution to this conversation. And I'm gonna mute the microphone again.
Thanks. Tom.
Sorry for jumping in like that. I thought you were making a good point, and I didn't want to let you doubt yourself or something. But yeah, maybe that was a little less than graceful.
Damn it, Ben. Why would you do that?
I'm just always doubting
That's
myself. No, please. I'm always down. I'm hoping that there's going to be a chapter on loving yourself, because I really need to get my shit together on that. Because like,
Yeah.
it's just like, no.
Same.
I know we're like almost out of time, but I just wanted to add something to that too, to everything that Tom was saying, is that like I was really surprised that she landed for her definition on like something out of The Road Less Traveled. Like I haven't read that, but I know that it's like, you know, popular enough that you can sort of be like, well, we didn't have to have all of these men are from Mars, women are from Venus examples. Like there's actually like in the sort of pop culture zeitgeist like a useful definition that's been here this whole time. I was like, wow, that's pretty awesome. I need to read that book.
Yeah.
It's nice to have like a mix of, like, you can tell she really did the work because she has like a good survey of, here's all these things that I don't really know if we can do anything with that, and then here's all these things kind of buried in the same silt and same material that, like, yo, this is good. And like, you know, random psychologist dudes from the 50s and 60s, like, she's giving them their flowers. I was like, okay, this is not what I was expecting, but nice.
Yeah, I agree. It feels very like a kind of scientific approach, where it's just like, well, let's find what works and what doesn't work, and it doesn't really necessarily matter where you find the bits that work. It's like approaching it like, okay, what can we use to help us in our objective? And yeah, sometimes it's surprising where things come up, but it's like, oh, this is a useful tool. I shall use it. I'm gonna shut up again.
Yeah. This seems like a fairly good stopping point. Does anyone have anything else they want to talk about the book before we wrap things up?
I like it.
Yeah, I think it's really good. Oh, I think one thing I wanted to say was like, when she talks about how like love is like this thing that you can't really talk about because like people are like, oh, like you're a woman, this is weak, like why are we talking about this? Even I actually felt like that. I was like, this seems really sentimental, and then like there's part of me that's like, or something. Like there's part of me that's like, oh no, like is this gonna be sentimental? And I'm like, wait, this is bell hooks. I really trust bell hooks, and also like, yeah, like the very thing that she's like pointing out that people do, I'm doing right now. So I'm really excited to. It's like I feel like this is like a much needed book for probably everyone, because I know so many people are just like, love, it's we like don't talk about it, or like it's this cosmic things of trying to understand it. So I'm really excited to read it. I think someone's gonna say something. Okay, maybe not. I thought someone like unmuted themselves earlier. Yeah, so yeah, anything else before we wrap up for the day? Okay, cool. Well,
Thank you.
yeah, no, thank you all for being here. I don't know exactly what we're gonna stop reading to. I always look after the book club, but I'm thinking of reading to page 69, which would be like kind of a lot of reading, but I feel like this book is very accessible. I know. I'm sorry. But I feel like
This is exactly what Bell Hooks was talking about.
But yeah, I feel like the reading's very accessible, and it's like I like the idea of just like reading as many books as we can. So that's what I'm thinking of doing. And also, we're reading 2 books though, so like I'll post if it's either page 69 or page 51. But yeah, I'll see you all next week actually for the Red Deal. And thanks for coming.
Heck yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye all.
See ya.